Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited. Today is a good day for Minnesotans. Obviously, the economic environment in Minnesota has improved. It's improved pretty substantially since the November forecast, where we actually saw a downgrade in future revenues. So we're very excited about that. I'm also excited to see where that's coming from. And I think that I would challenge my Democrat colleagues to read a little deeper into these documents to find out where that surplus comes from. I'm partly excited because I think that this surplus means that Democrats can stop talking about a gas tax in St. Paul. This surplus is partly due to the fact that gas prices are low. And low gas prices don't magically improve Minnesota's economy. What happens is low gas prices leave more money in the pockets of Minnesota families. And that is what improves Minnesota's economy. And that's what this is due to. Democrats can attempt to make victory laps on claiming that their policies over the last 2 years improved Minnesota's economy. But we got the report card on that last November when the forecast downgraded revenues in the next biennium by $400 million. Now we've seen an improvement, and I challenge them to look at why that improvement has happened. So not only has that money left more money in the pockets of Minnesota families, the Democrats still today, and I'm really disappointed to hear that not only are they going to spend all of this surplus money, but they're still proposing a huge tax increase on Minnesota families in the form of a gas tax. It's a regressive tax, and it really hurts Minnesota families a lot. And I hope that Democrats, and I'm going to challenge the governor and challenge Democrats in the Senate to take this off the table. It doesn't make any logical sense for Senate Democrats and the governor to be proposing a huge tax increase on Minnesota families when Minnesota has a $1.8 billion surplus. What we should do is look at these documents and learn from them that leaving more money in the pockets of Minnesota families is what helped Minnesota's economy. So we're going to have a few priorities this session. Obviously, we're going to give some of this surplus back to Minnesotans, and we're going to do it in a meaningful way that helps them. And we know that from this surplus we've learned, or this forecast we've learned, that that's what's going to help Minnesota families, and it's going to help Minnesota's economy. Part of our priorities that we've talked about this session, obviously growing more better paying jobs for all Minnesotans. That's our #1 priority, and that's really been the driver in this economic forecast. We're going to make sure that every child in the state of Minnesota receives the world-class education they deserve. Part of that will mean that we're going to put some new money into K-12 education. We're going to protect aging adults' quality of life. This is a place where the governor has really not come forward as a leader saying that we're going to fix some of the problems in reimbursing our nursing homes and taking care of those aging folks in Minnesota. We're going to refocus our transportation dollars on roads and bridges, and we're going to do it with real money, new money, right now. And we can do that without putting a gas tax in place and without raising a tax on Minnesota families. And we're going to ensure fair access and affordability in our health care. We're going to make sure that we fix the problems with MNsure as best we can, and we're going to need the Democrats' help on that. But that means that we need them to admit that there's some problems. So those are the things that we're going to focus on. We think this forecast is good news for Minnesotans, and we hope that the Democrats will take the gas tax off the table.
Well, this is the first time I've been in St. Paul on Friday in a while. The Speaker and I have both been traveling throughout the state: Little Falls, Willmar, Waconia, Morris, Brainerd, Duluth, Faribault, Monticello, Bemidji, amongst others. And what we've heard is that Minnesotans are overtaxed. So it's no surprise that when the Democrats came forward with a $2.1 billion tax increase in 2013, that there's a surplus now. That, in addition to the additional money that folks have in their pocket after the lower gas prices, leads me to believe that gas tax is the absolute wrong way to go. I'm highly disappointed that Senator Hayden did not take that off the table. Part of the reason we're having improved economy is because of the lower gas prices. So to propose a 16-cent gas tax on Minnesotans is absolutely the wrong direction. What we need to do is we need to help out our taxpayers. We need to provide some tax relief. And so I would challenge the Senate as well to take the gas tax off the table, to look what we can do for Minnesotans, because our job is to be good fiscal stewards for the state of Minnesota, and I challenge the Democrats to do that.
Well, we are showing in our forecast about $2 billion of surplus money projected. And my question is very simply, who can, with a straight face, propose to the people of Minnesota that we need another tax? And just to remind people of the state, back in 2011, when we did have a deficit, when Republicans were in the majority, the governor was insistent that we needed a big tax increase, and we didn't do it. And then in 13, when the Democrats were in majority, the governor said, we need a big tax increase, and we got it. And now we've got a surplus, and we say we need a big tax increase as well. That just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to the people of Minnesota. And on our side, we are going to work with the House majority to talk about tax reform, tax relief, broadly. There's a lot of ideas we can talk about that we ought to be thinking about. That's what we should have this conversation about this year. Not about more spending, but how to do tax relief in a meaningful way that results in opportunities for people in this economy, investment in the economy. That's what we need to have. We will be proposing spending, but it's spending that's targeted on results. I think the fact that we say we are spending money, and by virtue of that we've done something, we ought to quit doing that. We ought to show what we're getting for that spending. Simply doing more of it doesn't necessarily mean we've accomplished anything. We need to be smart about how we spend money. We need to look at results, and we need to figure out how we can do the best job we can to create opportunities for all people in Minnesota. That means let's stop collecting excess taxes that we don't need. Let's find ways to return that to the people who've paid them.
Well, listening to the governor and my Democratic friends, I just have to wonder, how big of a surplus would we have for them to actually propose that hardworking Minnesota families got some back? In November, we heard there was a $1 billion surplus, and their response was, well, no, we can't provide any tax relief there, and in fact, we have to add a 16-cent gas tax increase, 16 cents a gallon. Now we have an almost $2 billion surplus, and the response is, no, we can't provide any tax relief to hardworking Minnesota families, and we still need that 16 cents a gallon tax increase. You know, how big would it have to be? 3 billion, 4 billion, 5 billion? Is there any number at which our Democratic friends would actually say, government has enough, I guess we could give some back to some of our hardworking Minnesota families? I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that question, but from the Republican side, we believe that we have some money here to provide tax relief to hardworking Minnesota families.
So with that, obviously our priority is going to be on Minnesota families, and you see that here. We need to put the priority back on Minnesota families and not on government. The Democrats have stood here all too often saying one thing, and then they go to their chambers and do another. And what I'm talking about is instead of investing in the roads and bridges that they should have over the last 2 years, they invested in office buildings for themselves and pay raises for commissioners. And for too long, Democrats have put the priority here in St. Paul on politicians and not on Minnesota families. And when the state has a $1.8 or $1.9 billion surplus, now's the time, let's pay attention to where that surplus came from and the fact that it was money in the pockets of Minnesota families that grew the economy and spurred the economic growth, and that's the reason we have the surplus. Let's follow a successful model. Let's give some money back to Minnesotans. Let's invest in them. Let's let them invest in their families. And that, in turn, will help and benefit everybody in Minnesota. So with that, I'll answer questions.
What kind of tax relief are you talking about? Are you talking about income tax cuts? Are you talking about Kurt checks or what?
That's not a bad idea. No, I'm teasing. I think what we're going to do is look at where the money is going to do the most good. And I know Democrats are going to tell you that building a Senate office building and giving pay raises to their commissioners is the best way to spend tax dollars in Minnesota, but unfortunately we don't agree. We think the best way would be putting the money back in the pockets of Minnesotans, middle-class Minnesotans, folks that are working really hard and struggling to make ends meet, and that's going to be our focus. If that means, we'll look at things like helping out our senior citizens by exempting Social Security income, exempting veterans benefits. There's a number of things on the table that we can do, but those are the things that we should be prioritizing here in St. Paul, not how we can spend more money on office buildings and pay raises for commissioners. So that's where our priority is going to be.
So individual tax relief, not business tax relief, like Democrats say you want to do.
Well, you look at where money comes from for the state. This is why I'm so baffled at why Democrats can't figure this out. I mean, even in the revenue forecast today, I've been saying for months and a couple of years now, let's look at where the revenue comes from. It comes from income tax and sales tax for the most part. 33 billion of the 41, or a little more than that, comes from income tax and sales tax. What do we need for Minnesota's budget to be successful? We need Minnesotans to make more money. Plain and simple. That's what's going to grow Minnesota's economy. And taking more money out of their family budgets just frankly isn't going to help the state, and it's not going to help those Minnesota families. So why don't we look at a solution that we know works? We see it in this forecast. Let's put some money back in the pockets of Minnesota families, and let's do it in a meaningful way. And that's our priority.
Speaker, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when Ventura did it, the governor, I think, can make a pretty fair case that a lot of things changed after that. Isn't that true, that the budget since then has not been able to reach the levels of surplus, of any kind of reserves, all of that?
You know, let's just look at what happened today. You know, we've got a budget surplus of $1.8 million, or almost $1.9 billion. And you look at where it came from, it has a lot to do with the fact that gas prices are low, okay? So we've got a $1.9 billion surplus. What do Democrats want to do? They're proposing today to raise taxes because that's not enough, okay? But what that did, the low gas prices, it left money in Minnesota family budgets. And what are Democrats proposing to do? They're proposing to raise the price of gasoline in Minnesota. Is anybody paying attention here? I am, and I think Minnesotans are too. This is the wrong approach. They obviously wrote their talking points for today's press conference before they read the forecast documents. And I challenge them. Show me how taking money out of Minnesota families' pockets has helped. We got the report card on their last 2 years in November, when revenue forecast for this biennium, the next biennium, was reduced by $400 million. And today it's increasing by $600 million. Why? Minnesota families are doing better, mostly because they have more money in their family budgets because the gas prices are lower. The Democrats' response, take more money from families and raise the price of gasoline. Doesn't make any sense.
So are you talking about something that will do sort of a widespread tax relief that all or most Minnesotans will feel, or are you talking about more of a sort of a targeted tax credit approach for certain sectors?
You know, I think really anything's on the table. I think we need to look at who could use the help and really where we feel like that investment would spur Minnesota's economy to grow further. You know, frankly, I think Minnesotans have been struggling. I look at the statistics of you know, average income for the Minnesota families lagging behind inflation by $4,300 over the last 7 years. Haven't they struggled enough? While government's doing things like building a Senate office building and giving pay raises to the commissioners of 30%, how many Minnesotans have seen a 30% increase in their pay? And today, what did we find out? That the Democrats want to double down on taking more money out of the pockets of Minnesota families? It just doesn't make any logical sense. So yes, we're going to look at, you know, whether we target that to specific groups of Minnesotans. We'll look at all groups of Minnesotans, but we certainly need to make sure that we're putting the money back in the pockets of the people that need it.
Are you talking about all of this new $800 million going back to taxpayers in some form, or is there some spending that your caucus will recommend, or how do you come down?
You know, we've said very clearly that we've got priorities, and I mentioned that already. We want to invest some money into K-12 education. We want to invest some money into nursing homes, and we are going to invest money in our road and bridge infrastructure in Minnesota. We're going to do it in a meaningful way with real money, and we're going to do it in a way that doesn't hurt Minnesota families. But we're going to, with probably the majority of this money, we're going to propose to give it back to Minnesotans. And I guess Governor Dayton and the Democrats in the Senate are going to have to make the argument to Minnesotans that Minnesotans don't deserve their money back.
How much more money would you put into transportation? There's $200 million now.
We've been very clear about the fact that we want to go through the next month or so talking about what the need is. Obviously, Minnesota received this TFACT report about a little more than 2 years ago. So Democrats, while they had complete control of state government and could have done anything they wanted, sat on this report and did nothing while they were building Senate office buildings and giving pay raises to their commissioners. You know, what we want to do is figure out what the need is. Let's take a look at, let's dust off that TFACT report. Let's take a look at it, see if it's still relevant, see if it still makes sense, see if we can agree with the Democrats in the Senate and the governor on what the need actually is. If it's $5 billion, $4 billion, $6 billion over the next 10 years, let's figure out what that is. But we can meet the need over the next 10 years without a gas tax. But the problem is, and the reason the Democrats don't want to do that is because they want to spend all this money on other things. And they keep saying that roads and bridges are their priority, but their actions don't match their words, and that's the problem.
Mr. Speaker, how much of the surplus are you willing to say you want to give back?
As much as possible. I think Minnesotans deserve that. Let's figure out what we need to spend to provide the services that Minnesotans expect from state government. Let's figure out how much it takes to repair our roads and bridges and to make sure that every child in the state of Minnesota gets the world-class education they deserve. Let's make sure that we're showing senior citizens the respect they deserve in our long-term care facilities. And once we've figured out that we can take care of all those things, let's give the rest of it back to Minnesotans. When you have a budget surplus, it means that you've collected too much money from Minnesotans. So we need to make sure that we give it back. And we know today from this forecast that that's what actually has grown Minnesota's economy. That's what has helped, leaving money in the pockets of Minnesotans. So that's what we're going to propose.
Can you put a finer point on as much as possible? Are we talking about, I think one of the releases I got said this was worth $350 per Minnesotans. I think that was from your party. Are you talking about giving back $100 per Minnesota?
I think that you saw yesterday, and this probably will be very refreshing to Minnesotans because they haven't seen a lot of this over the last 2 years, but I think you saw yesterday that Republicans are going to be very thoughtful and very reasonable, and we're going to go through the process of making sure that we take care of our priorities, and whatever's left, we're not going to figure out ways to spend it. We're going to give it back to Minnesotans, but we can meet all the needs that Minnesotans expect us to, and still give a large portion of this money back to Minnesotans. And that's what we're going to propose to do.
Look at scratch.
Mr. Speaker, we're hearing office building and salary commissioners a lot. Those issues not done yet for you?
Guys, the reason I say it is because it really demonstrates how out of touch Democrats are with Minnesotans. The fact that the governor and House and Senate Democrats could stand in front of Minnesota today when we have a $1.8 billion surplus and propose not any tax cuts, not giving any money back to Minnesota families, but to increase taxes and do it in a regressive way that really hurts Minnesota families by raising the gas tax. I come from a district that really was hit hard by the housing bubble, but it wasn't just the housing bubble. I mean, Isani County, where I come from, was one of the fastest growing counties in the country during the good times. Really a boom and a bust story. And just a couple of years later, had some of the highest foreclosure rates in the country. It wasn't just the housing bubble that happened during that 2-year period. Gas prices went from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon. And people in my district lost their homes because gas prices doubled. And I don't know if the governor needs to spend more time out in greater Minnesota. This is my first Friday at the Capitol. I got a list of the cities I've been to: Brainerd, Faribault, Spring Valley, Bemidji, Park Rapids, St. Cloud, Black Duck, LaPorte, Fountain, Duluth, and Stacy. The governor needs to get out of St. Paul. He needs to understand that raising the gas tax is going to hurt Minnesota families. And I'd welcome him to come to my district, and I'll invite him to the cafes, and we can visit with folks in my district, some of whom lost their homes because gas prices doubled.
What do salary commissioners and office buildings have to do with the surplus?
Well, I think what it demonstrates is that Democrats have come to St. Paul saying that they're going to do all these great things for Minnesotans, but their priority hasn't been on Minnesotans. It's been on themselves. And I think Minnesotans are frustrated. I think that's why Republicans won the majority in the House. And I think that part of this economic confidence has to do with the fact that there's balance restored in state government. Democrats are out of touch with Minnesotans. The words that they spoke to you today demonstrate that very clearly. And we're going to make sure that we return our priority back on Minnesota families.
The theory that this forecast is good because Republicans now have the House, there's balance restored to the Capitol.
The voters spoke very clearly in November that they didn't like the direction that Democrats were taking. I think the November forecast represented very clearly that the policies they put in place last year and the year before didn't help Minnesota families, and they didn't help Minnesota's economy, okay? Remember that in November, they downgraded the revenues in the next biennium by $400 million. Today, we've seen that increase. Why? Mostly because gas prices are low. But I think also Minnesota's economy understands that we don't have a runaway government that, when we didn't need to raise any taxes, put in place one of the largest tax increases in state history. I think people have confidence in the fact that balance has been restored in state government.
Governor Dayton got 1 million votes. Governor Dayton got 1 million votes. Governor Dayton was reelected. Isn't that an endorsement of what his plans, what he's doing?
House Republicans received, I forget the number, 100,000 more votes than House Democrats statewide. We also won the majority, and we won it in places like, Black Duck and LaPorte and Fountain and Stacy and, and Faribault. And, I think the governor needs to pay attention to what Minnesotans are saying. And I can't believe how tone-deaf Democrats are today to think that we have a $1.8 billion surplus, and they want to spend not only all of that, but they want to, on top of that, raise a gas tax. Minnesotans already gave us money to pay for roads and bridges, and we have more than enough to spend a lot more money on roads and bridges today. We don't need to raise a gas tax.
It was clear Democrats took credit for the budget surplus. Up to there. Are you going to take credit for the budget surplus from December on then, Mr. Speaker?
Go ahead. No, I'm not. Minnesotans deserve the credit. Read the forecast documents. Where did it come from? It came from lower oil prices and a rising dollar affect economic growth. It's not, you look at job growth and wage growth in Minnesota, it's still lags behind the national average right now. That's a problem. You look at where income and revenue comes from for the state, it comes from Minnesotans. We need to show them that we respect that. And let's let them invest in their lives for once, instead of letting Democrats invest in office buildings and commissioners' pay raises in St. Paul. Let's invest in Minnesotans. We believe in Minnesotans, and now is the opportunity for everybody's actions to match their words, and that's what you'll see out of the Republicans.
Following up on what you've said about Speaker.
Yes.
Following up on
the others to have a chance too.
Following up on what you already said, I'm trying to get this clear. Are you talking about any tax relief would only come out of the surplus? You would not try to roll back the $2 billion in tax increases that you complained about?
We may, we likely will, I should say. Obviously, spending has grown in the state of Minnesota, a huge amount under Democrat control. What the governor's proposing is about a little more than a 20% increase in state spending since that first budget in 2011. That's not sustainable. Have Minnesota families seen a 20% increase in their budgets? He's given his commissioners a 30% increase in salaries. That's on top of the 5% and 5% the 2 previous years. Have Minnesota families seen that sort of surplus? No. So what we need to make sure is that we're looking at Minnesota not just today in this next 2 years, but that we're really looking at what is going to help Minnesotans over the long term. And I haven't seen a long-term vision. The Democrats talk about wanting a 10-year plan for Minnesota in transportation, but they refuse to look at what Minnesota is going to look like 10 years from now if we continue the kind of tax increases and spending increases that they've been on for the last 2 years. So I believe in Minnesotans. I believe that we need to make some basic investments in things that I think Minnesotans expect, like senior citizens and K-12 education and road and bridge infrastructure. And I think we can do that within the budget that we have and still give a large portion of the surplus back to Minnesotans where it's going to do the most good.
Will you look at scrapping the 4th tier?
Go ahead, Senator.
Actually, I don't want to talk about the 4th tier. I want to challenge Governor Dayton. When gas prices drop below $2, you would not believe the collective sigh of relief among my family and friends. You have no idea what it means to a family to see a major expense for commuting, for running their business, drop from $4 to $2. I mean, they were joyful. It was all over social media how happy they were. And for the governor to not get that, the surplus is because those families took that extra $2 a gallon and spent a little more on Christmas. Maybe they saved a little more. Maybe they bought a car so their 16-year-old could go to work and start saving for college. Those families made this a difference. And the fact that the governor won't think of them first and take the gas tax off the table when there's almost $2 billion in surplus is unconscionable. Thank you.
Speaker, could you clarify, is the fourth tier on the table, or is that something you're going to look into?
You know, we're not really looking at that. I think if we look at tax relief for Minnesota families, at putting some money back in their pockets, we're going to look at everybody, not just single out, you know, one group. I know the Democrats might think that that's what we would do, but no. I mean, we're going to look at putting money back in the pockets of Minnesota families, and that means all of them. So if we did look at the income tax, it would be all tiers of the income tax.
So how much are you talking about putting back? Are you saying a majority? Are you saying 900 million will go back in tax cuts or checks or something?
Yes.
Please, 900
At least that much. Probably a lot more than that.